I'm here today with Elizabeth Jarrett Andrew. Elizabeth has spoken at our Writing for Your Life conferences, and you may have seen many excerpts that we've posted from her books about writing. She's the author of Writing the Sacred Journey, The Art and Practice of Spiritual Memoir, and Living Revision, A Writer's Craft as Spiritual Practice, as well as several other books. Elizabeth is a spiritual teacher and writing coach dedicated to facilitating creative emergence through one-on-one coaching, workshops, and retreats. Our reason for getting together today is actually to discuss and celebrate what is in essence a re-release of one of her books, Swinging on the Garden Gate, a memoir of bisexuality and spirit. You can learn more about Elizabeth and all that she does at elizabethjarrettandrew.com. So Elizabeth, welcome. It's so great to be here with you again.
It's really good to be with you too, Brian.
So maybe to get started, what else would you like people to know about you than what I briefly touched on?
Oh goodness. Well, I've been taking a little bit of a hiatus from teaching, but I'll be back full force in 2023. So I teach a lot of spiritual memoir writing and revision as a spiritual practice, and all of that, of course, is now both online and in person in Minneapolis. So I'm really eager to re-engage with with other writers after a restorative break.
Good. Well, I mean, we've all been through types of breaks here, haven't we?
Yes. Yeah.
For good or for worse. But before we get into the re-release, let's talk about the other books that you've written, in particular the ones that I mentioned that are so important for writers.
Yeah. I have most of my teaching career in writing has been in the literary world. I taught at the Loft Literary Center for 20 plus years. And so I did an MFA, and, so I was really quite steeped in the writer's workshop, and only within the last decade or so have I realized that my real love of writing is in how writing is transformative and changes the writer. And actually I've come to really live into some of Robert Frost's famous words, where he said, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And I think what he's saying there is that, like, as writers, we need to be open-hearted and open to being transformed, and that actually is like the secret ingredient that goes into our language, into the page, that then makes transformation available for a reader. So I've really become passionate about writing as a transformational practice.
Well, Living Revision was basically about that, right?
Yes, exactly.
So that was a really good, I think, learning tool and reference for a lot of writers.
I hope so. Yeah. And I think, I mean, the lovely thing about reclaiming the sacred dimension of the writing practice is that it actually makes your writing better, right?
What a concept.
Instead of thinking like audience, what does the audience want? How do I please the audience? Instead of like having that kind of product and destination focus in our writing, to have a more open-hearted, exploratory, honest relationship with writing, and then it makes your writing really shine.
I was gonna say, at the end of the day, that's better for the audience anyway, right?
Absolutely. So it's kind of a win-win thing, but it takes some gumption, I think, to nurture that dimension, that interior dimension. It's really countercultural because that's not the way we're trained as artists to work.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, a lot of the folks that I deal with struggle with imposter syndrome in one form or another. You know what I mean? So that rears its ugly head a lot of times, I think, when people are trying maybe to get more of their inner self on the page.
Yeah. And it's like it's a leap for many people to even own that they are writers.
Yeah.
Whereas once you actually have a steady practice of writing, and once you've published, all of it becomes much fuzzier. Like, what does make a writer, and what does give one credibility? And so, like, I've come back to a writer is someone who writes. It's really kind of simple. So, yeah.
So, as I mentioned, the re-release of the book is titled "Swinging on the Garden Gate: A Memoir of Bisexuality and Spirit." So maybe you could tell folks, first of all, how that originally came about, the first version of it, and then maybe how it came about in its new form.
The book itself or the
Yeah.
title?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Well, there's two different stories there. So when I was in my early 20s, I woke up to my sexual identity. I guess I was a little late in coming to that compared to the young people today, but I was beginning to pay attention to my attraction to others and what my body was asking for, and realizing that I was not straight, and really struggled with that because I was born and bred United Methodist and raised in a liberal family and a liberal congregation, but still, sexuality in general was not something we talked about, and definitely not homosexuality. And I barely even knew the word bisexuality at that point. So just given my personality, I write to find out what I think. I write to find out what I feel, right? Like that's also what makes a writer, is like, do you need that medium in order to listen to yourself, in order to make sense of life? So I started to write my story, and that was in the 90s, when memoir was really kind of coming into its own as a genre. So the writing program that I was in was teaching a lot of memoir writing, and I didn't want to write memoir. I wanted to write fiction. but it was one of these situations where I just needed to figure it out. And so there's something about coming out to yourself that sheds new light on all of your previous experiences. It's like anytime you realize something true about yourself that you had denied before, it puts a different colored lens on your eyes, and you just kind of have to go back and revisit everything that's come before with that new information. So that's really what I was doing in my 20s, was rewriting my story in a sense. Like, okay, now that I know this about myself, what sense do I make of my childhood? What sense do I make of God? Like, how do I relate to God when, at least in some parts of Christianity, these experiences that feel very natural and very organic and that feel very me, are denied or denigrated. So the writing of the memoir was really a tool for self-understanding, at least in the first draft, and then it became a tool for coming out. So it was like, I sat down with my parents and said, you know what, I'm bisexual, and here, read my book.
Wow.
It's just easier.
That must have been an interesting conversation.
My poor parents. So that was the early stage of the memoir. And then I had a mentor who, he's a wonderful person. He's a Jewish writer and quirky interest in spirituality. And he said, Elizabeth, you're writing a spiritual memoir, and you're writing in the tradition of all these writers, St. Augustine, Teresa of Avila, you're writing in the tradition of Malcolm X, all these great memoirs. And I was like, what is spiritual memoir? You know, so it was really a huge gift to plunge into that legacy, you know, into that tradition, and find that, in fact, a lot of the questions that I was asking, like, what does it mean to be embodied spirit, are just fundamental questions that people of all traditions ask, and, you know, that human beings ask, right? And that memoir is a great way to wrestle with them. So at that point, I started to think of it not just as private exploration, but it's not, you know, an actual book that could be shaped and shared.
And how did you get connected with Skinner House then to get it published?
You know, that was just sheer luck. I initially, when I was shopping around for publishers, I was looking, you know, within my own tradition, you know, United Methodist. I was looking for Christian publisher that could, because in the end, I felt like my target audience was people who were questioning their Christians who were questioning their sexual identity and their family. And at that point, most of the religious publishing houses were not.
They weren't interested. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was the memoir piece that was hard for them primarily. I think. Yeah,
really?
I mean, I think the sexuality was, you know, also a dimension, but nobody had published memoir in those religious publishing houses at that point, because memoir was so new. I know, isn't that interesting? That's just
I mean,
22 years ago.
It's saturated with it since then, but
I know. But yeah, I think I was the first. I should look at this. I'm not entirely sure about this, but I think mine was the first, if not one of the first memoirs that Skinner House published. So luckily, in that first batch of inquiries, Skinner House took the bait, and they said, you know, you need to rewrite it. It's in, you know, 3 time frames. It needs to be in 2. But it's been a really good home for me at Skinner House. And in some ways it's really worked well, because I've had, you know, kind of the support of the Unitarians. Skinner House is the imprint of the Unitarians. So I've had that kind of radical, inclusive support from them, which back then I really needed.
Sure.
So anyhow, that's the long-winded original story. And then it went out of print after about 6 years. And I got all the remaindered copies and had them in my garage. And I kid you not, every year after that, I sold them on Amazon. And I just, you know, between 20 and 50 copies would go out my door. And having written 5 other books in the meantime, when it was coming up on the 20th anniversary of this book, I thought, you know, of all my books, Swinging on the Garden Gate did the most good in the world, that most tangible, life-changing good, because, and it was, you know, it was very small. It didn't reach a huge audience, but there were a handful of readers who I know it made a tremendous difference to. I had one college student come up to me at a panel conversation once, and she brought her copy of Swinging on the Garden Gate, and it looked like it had been run over by a truck. It was dog-eared and bent and notes all over it. And she said, you know, you saved my life.
Wow, that's cool.
And I just, because when you're able to make space in the world for someone else to breathe by sharing your story, like there's nothing else like it for a writer. And so even though numbers were really small, I felt like, you know, this book has a place, like
an impact.
It's done important work, and I don't like that it's not available. So I decided I was just going to reprint it myself, self-publish it. But before I did, I wrote to my editor and I said, any chance Skinner House would be interested? And they're like, Yes. We think
Very
that it
cool.
was actually premature, that the world wasn't ready for this book when it first came out. And
Hmm. Hmm.
they might be more ready now. So, hopefully, although, the climate is so for queer folk, it's not always it's not much better today than it was some ways, but I just am so grateful that they're supporting that vision and getting another queer story out into the world.
Yeah, yeah. Now the title has been tweaked. So let's talk about that. But has anything else in the book been changed, or is it really just the original?
It went through an equity review.
Okay.
So, 22 years
Really?
gives you all kinds of insight into like what you didn't know. So yeah, some of the language is different, minor points. There's just some details that we cut that were unnecessary and, could have raised hackles unnecessarily. The big change is that the kids book, The Secret Garden, was really an important, it played an important role in my coming out story.
Mm.
And in the initial edition, we had quotes from The Secret Garden that headed each of the chapters. And The Secret Garden actually is a controversial book. It's, believe it or not, the main story is, I think, really solid, but there's some the main character grew up in colonial India, and she treats the servants of her house horribly. So there's some racial issues, there's some ableist issues in that book, and they just wanted to not have those excerpts
Sure, sure.
triggering people. I feel sad about that loss because the story of coming alive that book tells, I think, is still really valuable. And um, I'm hopeful that give it another 20 years, maybe the cultural climate will have calmed down enough that we can recognize that historical stories have historical flaws
Yeah, yeah.
and still have gifts to offer us. But for now, it's fine. So that's the big change. It's also, this new edition has a new forward from me and a new forward from Karen Oliveto, the United Methodist bishop.
Yes, yes. So you and Karen did a great book launch event online, which was exciting to see. And tell folks just real briefly about Karen, who she is.
Yeah, so she's an out lesbian bishop of the United Methodist Church, and she served at one of the largest United Methodist churches in San Francisco. I think it's the largest, and is now in I can't remember what the district is called. It's like the
Mountain something or other. It's in Denver, but it's Mountain States or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so she's just been a real, lifelong advocate for GLBTQA folks inside the Methodist Church, and a real witness to the huge gifts of leadership that queer people have to offer the church, and that generally the United Methodist Church does not embrace. I'm not quite sure how she's gotten away with it. I mean, that's a testimony to her ability to be a loving, gracious leader.
And so just to complete the picture, Karen, has written her own books, and she's also spoken at Writing for Your Life conferences. So,
yeah.
We're friends, mutual friends there too. So
yeah, that's marvelous. She's great.
But then the title was tweaked for your book too, right? The new
Yeah.
title is a little bit different than that.
Yeah, the old subtitle was Spiritual Memoir, and the new subtitle is A Memoir of Bisexuality and Spirit.
Okay.
And that's a deliberate choice, both on my part and on Skinner House's, that I don't think that we could have been quite that brave to put the word bisexuality on the cover 22 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
But I really want to reach people who are exploring bisexuality, or or the people who love them, and so to just be overt about it, I think is important. Um, so so yeah, that was behind the choice, is
Cool.
try to really target the audience.
And so the book is available now, right, for order.
Yes.
And do you have any like book tours or other podcasts or other kinds of things planned to help support the launch?
Yeah, well, there's just been an ongoing kind of rolling effort. I don't have anything on the calendar right now, but yeah, I've done a number of radio interviews and podcast kinds of things. So yeah, that will continue.
Sure.
I have a newsletter, and so if you're interested in like finding those, you could always go to that newsletter. So
Cool. So what about looking forward? I'm sure you're not done writing. So can you tell us anything about next projects, or is it too early?
um no, no, I've actually got two big projects cooking. One is a kids novel, actually. I'm dabbling in middle grade fiction.
Wow.
I know
It's a departure, isn't it, from
it's totally a departure, but in some ways it's not, because that it was seventh and eighth grade, and
mm,
when I just read my way through adolescence, that I decided I really want to write, and I want to write kids lit. I want to write, I want to write the next Newbery Award winner,
for you?
and it's taken me, I was 12 when I was thinking that, so it's taking me 40 years to finally get around to writing a novel. So I'm kind of new at it and learning, but I'm having a lot of fun with that. And then the other project that's actually heading toward publication in fall of 23 is a book about what I'm calling well, it probably won't be called The Release, because we're going to change the title, but it's about that stage that writers face at the end of a project where you have to make all these difficult decisions: publish or not publish, self-publish or traditional publish. What's the point? Is it worth the effort? How much time do I give marketing? All of those difficult decisions. And it's about reclaiming creativity during
Mm,
that stage
mm.
and navigating all of those decisions with grace and integrity. So basically, what's a creative spiritual practice that we can bring to bear during that time? Because lots of writers lose their way then.
Mm, mm.
They get driven by their ego to get the right publisher, or the right numbers of sales, um, and lots of times we forget why we were writing in the first place. I think for a lot of writers, it's the writing that's the life-giving part of the process, and marketing or writing query letters, like that's deadening for us. So how do we kind of shift our thinking about those tasks in a way that makes them life-giving, and makes them playful, or allow us to continue to grow through those tasks. So yeah, that's what's cooking with Skinner House right now.
Well, that's a really important topic, and it's right in the sweet spot for writing for your life. So, when you have that ready to roll, let's make sure we talk about that one too, because, I deal with a lot of authors that feel, those same tensions that you're describing.
Yeah. Well, I would love to be in conversation about that. Yeah.
Good, good. Well, for now, the new release that Elizabeth's got is Swinging on the Garden Gate, a memoir of bisexuality and spirit. And you can learn more about all of Elizabeth's work at elizabethjarrettandrew.com. So, Elizabeth, congratulations on this and all the wonderful things that you do. I'm, so thrilled to see you continuing, down the incredible path that you've been on. And so glad to hear that it's continuing in very fruitful ways.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian. And likewise with your own work with writing for your life. It's really been a treat to travel with you through that work.
Well, it's been a blessing for us all, I think, but
Yeah.
thank you.